So Phil recruited me to sell these cards, and now I am recruiting you.
Don't worry about Phil. He drives a Corvette. He is doing just fine.
Hello, people of the internet. What's up? Usually we give it a minute, see if people hop on. Super excited for today's stream, everyone, because we have a special guest. As you can see, it's not just me, Danielle, talking head on the internet. Really excited to get into this topic, especially for those of you that have been here a while and we're here for the original Jay Shetty stream. We've got a lot to unpack today, I think. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, we can start there, John.
Hi, I'm John McDermott. I am an independent journalist based in Los Angeles. And if you're here, you probably might know me as the guy who wrote the recent investigation into Jay Shetty for the Guardian newspaper.
So I have the article linked in the description of this if you're watching live or catching the replay. So you can go and click through to that if you haven't seen it. I see we have one commenter saying Jay Shetty ? So would you mind explaining who Jay Shetty is briefly before we get into the entire story, I suppose?
Jay Shetty is arguably the single most famous self-help guru media personality working, other than Tony Robbins. I don't know really who would be on his level. He so he claims was a monk for 3 years in India, and after he left the ashram, pursued a life as a public, his line was always, his goal was to spread wisdom with the world. So he became a self-help personality, and he's become wildly successful at that. Has kind of been able to ascend into the highest ranks of Hollywood. He officiated J-Lo and Ben Affleck's wedding, which I believe was in late 2022, I want to say.
Something like that.
November 2022. He has an incredibly successful podcast. It was the 10th most subscribed to podcast in the US last year. So up there with, Huberman Lab and all of these other wildly successful podcasts. He has just a revolving door of high-profile celebrity guests on his podcast. I mean, Michelle Obama, one of Kobe Bryant's last interviews before his tragic death was on the Jay Shetty podcast. He interviewed Joe Biden in the White House, an exclusive interview about the Biden administration's mental health initiatives. And Joe Biden does not give people sit-down interviews anymore, likely because of his age, and he's a little prone to gaffes these days. It's hard to overstate just how successful Jay has been as this kind of pseudo mental health / spiritual advisor to the stars and to the public. He's written a couple of New York Times bestsellers. First one was called Think Like a Monk, which was kind of like a memoir / self-help book about his time as a monk and the lessons he learned. And then the second one, which is what put him on my radar, 8 Rules of Love, which is about helping people with their relationships. So probably more than you needed, but.
No, that's great. And I think too, I know he does like tours where he goes and speaks on stages and you can like buy tickets. I had a friend that was like obsessed with him for a while until I set her straight. And she would like go to these live shows where he would do like motivational talks like Tony Robbins. So
yeah. And I attended one as part of the initial coverage. So backstory, Jay releases this book. I want to say it was in very late 2022 or very early 2023. He releases 8 Rules of Love. And I want to make this very clear because behind the scenes, Jay's publicity team has tried to portray me as like an obsessed, not fan, but anti-fan, as somebody who's just been waiting for years to take down Jay Shetty.
You're just a jealous internet hater, John.
I'm just a jealous hater. I'm just a jealous hater.
Me too.
Yeah. I did not know who Jay Shetty was until his publicity team asked me. They asked for me specifically through Esquire magazine to cover Jay Shetty and cover the release of his new book, specifically to cover the release of his new book and the event in Los Angeles promoting it, the stage show that you were referencing. So I get this assignment from Esquire. Esquire was like, hey, would you be up for this? I said, sure, why not? You know, it wasn't the most glamorous assignment I've ever had, but
Well, and especially if you don't know who he is, you're kind of just like, oh, whatever, another schmuck.
Well, my initial thought was that this was an interesting way in to write about the wellness trend in our culture and the main of therapy and mental health and how these things have, growing up to attend therapy was very stigmatized. And now the pendulum has swung totally in the other direction, where I long now wonder if we have overcorrected and if all of this therapy talk that is now just part of everyday conversation, I wonder if in some ways there are some downsides to it. And so I was interested in talking about this kind of, again, how therapy and Eastern spiritualism and kind of Western capitalism are all kind of melding into this same thing. A lot of what you cover right on your show. And, there's a racket around it, right? And there's an entire industry kind of built around these things. And they're all kind of squishy, right? It's not hard psychology. It's not hard science. It's just scientific enough to appear legitimate at times, but then it's also just spiritual enough to kind of not really be subject to any scientific rigor, because it's like, well, yeah. And so by playing both of those things at the same time, you never really have to answer for one or the other. And that was kind of my
explain it. You don't ever actually have to have the definition. If it sounds scientific enough or spiritual enough, someone's like, well, those words sound legit, so I believe whatever you're saying.
Well, and a lot of these people will sometimes reference legitimate psychological studies, but then other times they will reference spiritualism, which is, not subject to scientific scrutiny.
Open for interpretation.
Right. So there's always a way to kind of get around both of it. And that was the idea I was trying to explore. I did not have an axe to grind against Jay Shetty. My initial, so I actually met Jay as part of this assignment. I interviewed him in the restaurant of a hotel in Santa Monica, right on the water, very kind of swank hotel. And I was kind of pushing him on this subject, and I was like, what do you think about this merging of Eastern spiritualism with Western capitalism? And he gave kind of some evasive answers, and he's very good at kind of talking in circles, and I was like, all right, well, this guy's just, a lot of what he's saying is just kind of hollow. And I was reading his book at the same time. I actually read his second book first. I had been busy with some other journalism assignments at the time. So admittedly, I did not go in armed with all of my background research, but his publicity team was like, hey, anything else you need after the fact, you can come back to us with questions, which is, pretty standard operating. But, regrettably, I didn't go in there, with everything I know now, which probably would have been impossible. I thought it was just going to be kind of a pretty light, fluffy profile. And I was like, all right, he's kind of corny. Then I was reading his book. And one thing that really stuck out to me about his book is that, so Jay's entire spiel, his entire self-brand is that he was a monk for 3 years. But so I'm reading his book and I was like, well, where's everything he learned as a monk? Jay is just aggregating all of these different concepts that he pulls from elsewhere, that he pulls from other spiritual figures, or, sometimes he'll quote like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, or, famous musicians. He kind of seems to have a weird obsession with tech bros. In Think Like a Monk, he quotes Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, Evan Spiegel from Snapchat, like all of these tech luminaries. So it's kind of this like business wisdom, kind of mixed with spiritualism, and just this hodgepodge of all these different, little pearls of wisdom. And then sometimes he would reference, like a Stanford or Harvard psychological study. But I was just like, well, so little of this actually pertains to whatever he learned in, it's not, I keep wanting to call it a monastery, but the
I know,
actual
me
term
too.
for it, yeah. The actual term for it in Hinduism is an ashram. But I was like, well, so little of this pertains to, his time as a monk. And I was like, that's a little strange. It was just pop psychology that you could find anywhere else. And there are tons of people doing this, they aggregate all this information and then they try to, synthesize something out of it. But there's not, at the heart of it, there's not much that's original. So
Yeah, I think
So
that's
anyways,
what's always
yeah.
really interests me about the self-help industry in general. Like if you look at people like Rachel Hollis or any of these like larger players, they're basically just reading other people's self-help books or personal development books and then regurgitating it in their own words as if they're like some revolutionary idea maker of like, I discovered the secrets to us all being happy. And it's always kind of like, there was obviously a point in my life where I drank the Kool-Aid and was like, this is amazing. But then once you kind of take a step back and look at it, you're like, this guy doesn't actually know anything. He's just saying what other people have already said. I don't know. There's just like,
and that's how it works with the books. And that's how it works with the podcast. It's like, you go on my podcast, I'll be on your podcast. We'll blurb each other's books. We'll, I'll like a book blurb, at the beginning where
best book I've ever read.
Right. Totally. And just kind of, it's just this parlor game where they're just passing each other around and there's no incentive for someone to say, hey, that guy's full of shit, because then you'll be kicked out of the group. It's like everyone has to be in on this together. And that's kind of the wider, and I think I've said this a couple of times, is Jay is just kind of a symptom of something more systemic, right? But, when you're critiquing these things, it's kind of hard to critique the entire wellness industry, which is, spans the entire world and is trillions of dollars big. I know you and Kea are doing your best to do exactly that, but
it's a lot. And I also mean, like, at the end of the day, I mean, I focus mostly on like the coaching aspect of things. And even that, it's like, it's very hard to say that the industry as a whole is horrible, but there is a large portion of it of people doing really shady shit. So it's like finding that balance of how can I comment on this without trying to like paint everything with broad strokes, right?
Totally. And I want to make something, unequivocally clear, which is that I am not against all coaches. I'm sure there are some genuine good actors out there. I'm not against Eastern spiritualism. I'm not against Hinduism. I myself practice Buddhist style meditation. I've read a lot about Buddhism. It's been very helpful for me to learn about that philosophy. When it becomes commodified to this degree, I think it opens it up to some scrutiny. And it absolutely should, and especially to the degree that Jay has commodified it. So anyways, we have this lunch. We do like an hour-long interview over lunch. And then we break. This show is that night. So it's like, all right, he's going to go, do whatever. I'm going to do whatever. And then we're going to meet again for that show. So I go to the show. And at the show, that's when my skepticism really kicked in. So he started the show with like a, it's like not quite rapping, but like a slam poetry performance.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. About love. And it was kind of this like multimedia performance where he was, splashing like snippets from different famous rom-coms. Like I remember Grease was part of it. And then he was, spoken word. That's the term I was looking for.
Okay.
He was doing this like a spoken word rap over that. I was like, all right, this is something. And then it became Tony Robbins-esque, where he would invite people on stage to kind of give this emotional performance before an audience of, I don't know how many people that theater holds. I want to say, a couple thousand maybe. It was at the YouTube Theater, which is right next to the SoFi Stadium, the football stadium in LA.
Gotcha.
So he does that, and he kind of invites this one girl on and puts her in a sensory deprivation chamber on stage. they had just constructed this thing out of pipes and like laid black curtains and kind of made this box, and then put noise canceling headphones on her. So she's in a literal black box on stage.
So
and then
she can't see anything.
Can't see anything, can't hear anything.
Gotcha.
And then we're watching her through a live feed because they had put a camera inside this box.
Okay.
Very, very strange. I thought it was very bizarre. And, the people I was sitting with felt similarly. Then the thing that was, I thought, very exploitive was later on in the show, he invited a woman on stage and, he was like, who here is having trouble with one of their relationships? And that can apply to literally anyone. I don't know a single person who doesn't have one relationship in their life that's strained in some way. I mean, that's just what it's like to be a human, to be alive. So brings this woman on stage. She tells about how she's been estranged from her brother, hasn't talked to him in years. He makes her call him on stage. Call goes to voicemail. He doesn't pick up. He takes the phone out of her hand, ends the call, and immediately calls back the same number. And we have to listen to this woman. Jay instructs her to leave a voicemail. He's like, this time if it goes to voicemail, leave a voicemail. And we have to listen to this woman leave a voicemail for her brother, who, again, she hasn't talked to for many years. And it just struck me as kind of uncomfortable and kind of a little coercive, quite frankly.
Yeah, like wildly inappropriate, for sure.
Well, no one wants to be the person on stage who ruins the show and it's like, yeah, I don't want to do that. It's like when somebody proposes at a sports game,
Exactly.
It's like you're putting that person on the spot publicly. So that's when I was like, all right, let's take a harder look at this guy.
And I remember you saying, like, in the article, because you recounted that story, and you said that, like, the people next to you were also like, this is the cringiest thing I've ever seen, right?
The woman 2 seats to my right. I had started talking to him. So the show lasted for more than 3 hours. It was insanely long. I mean, a show like that, you want to feel like, oh, I wish there was more to the show. You want to be like, Jesus, when is this thing going to end?
Yeah.
It was like 3.5 hours. There was an intermission for his, one-man stage show. So anyways, so I had gotten, during the intermission and, beforehand, because I was backstage, I was like in the VIP area, which Jay charged hundreds of dollars for people to access, on top of the ticket, which was already pretty hefty.
And what do they get? Like photos with him or something?
Yeah, you got to go early to a Q&A session, which was, again, pretty hollow. So one woman, because the book is all about relationships, I distinctly remember that in that Q&A section, which was like maybe 100 people, right? It was supposed to be this like really intimate Q&A, and then they ended it with a meditation exercise. And this one woman asked what I thought was a very poignant question. She was like, well, what do you think about polyamory? What do you think about non-monogamy? Because the book is very much heteronormative and talks just very much about, traditional monogamous relationships. And obviously what a relationship is being redefined by a lot of different communities. So I was like, oh, that's a good question. And he really didn't give an answer. Again, he's kind of talking in circles and kind of evaded. And I was just like, this guy doesn't really have much to say on that topic. Like, that's interesting. I come to find out that the religious tradition that he comes from is incredibly orthodox, specifically when it comes to sex and relationships. Sex is forbidden outside of marriage for the purpose of procreation. It's a very kind of fundamentalist form of Hinduism that he comes from, which explains a lot of what was in the book. So anyway, sorry, I forgot where I was going with this. The woman 2 seats to my right, she audibly remarked, this is mortifying, as the woman on stage was leaving her voicemail. And I was just like, it's not just me. I talked to some other people that attended the event, and they, friends of mine, who I told them I was, meeting and interviewed Jay Shetty, and they were like, oh, that's so cool. I really like his podcast and his Instagram. they were very put off by the show. The response that I got was that it had kind of a mega church, kind of Joel Osteen kind of vibe to it.
Exactly. I'm getting a lot of comments here reading Landmark vibes, which I don't know if you're familiar with Landmark, but very much cult.
What is a Landmark?
It's like a personal development sort of like mega company where they host these seminars, and then they make you sit in a room for like 8 hours. And then at the end, they'll pitch you their $12,000 personal development program. And then you buy that, and then you become the seminar host, and just another Tony Robbins.
It's always at the end. It's always interesting how they don't mention the price until the end.
Yeah, because they want you to be exhausted.
Well, that's exactly what I did with the Jay Shetty life coaching school. So I kind of, I didn't tell them I wasn't a reporter, but they didn't ask. I just called up and I was just like, hey, can you tell me about what it's like to sign up? Because they do not list the price online.
No.
Which I think is very telling. But it wasn't until, the end of my 30-minute conversation, and that guy's just a salesman. He's there to close you. He's there 100%. To get you set. And he's just like, so like, and it's like, oh, and here is the price. And it's an investment in your future. But it's not until after, he's kind of taken you down that sales funnel, if you know anything about marketing. And
exactly. And like asked you your pain points. So then he can, right. Well, you said you wanted a better job. This is the opportunity.
And by the way, that salesman, and I asked him, he brought this up kind of on his own. His job is 100% commission based. So his only incentive is to sell you. He does not get paid. I mean, he doesn't have a base salary. So his only job is to close you. That's his only incentive, So after that live show, I started to get a little bit more curious. And then I went online, and I think I just Googled like Jay Shetty controversy. I found the Nicole Arbor video.
Right.
I found some articles about all of his plagiarism, and the plagiarism was really stuck with me because there's no way you're not going to get caught plagiarizing. Like it's not only is it unethical, you shouldn't plagiarize, but you're going to get found out. Like it's going to happen. I mean, if you get famous enough and somebody, or I mean, even not like, I don't know if you followed what happened with the president of Harvard.
No.
How she was ousted after it was found out that she plagiarized a lot of her academic writings.
Interesting. No,
and that was politically motivated. A lot of conservatives wanted her out of there, specifically because of her response to the Israeli-Hamas conflict. So, I mean, it was like a very kind of bizarre, intensely layered political scandal, but a bunch of these conservatives went through her academic record and found some pretty, even though it was politically motivated, they were right in that she had plagiarized in a lot of different ways. And it eventually led to, her resignation. But my point being is that it's just so easy for somebody to be like, oh, here's this post. Here's this post. They are the same. Here are the respective time stamps. And it's very clearly an act of plagiarism. So there's no way you can get caught. So it's like, man, the person who is brazen enough to plagiarize and to plagiarize on that scale, we're talking hundreds of posts.
Yeah, like I'm trying to see if I can pull one up here just to kind of show people.
The Nicole Arbor video does a good job of providing specific examples.
Okay, is that on YouTube?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I'm gone. We're back. Yeah, because it's interesting to see. I know there's like there's a Tony Robbins post. I think it was on the H3 podcast where they show it like side by side, and he changes like 2 words or something.
Right.
And then it's so funny.
And it's not, but also from smaller social media accounts. And it's not like he took a screenshot and shared this and, included someone's credit, which is still, I think, a little bit of a gray area, to just kind of indiscriminately take other people's posts and then you give them a little shout out in the caption. A lot of people think that that's fair game. I'm not so sure. I think if you're going to use someone else's original content, you should compensate them in some way, or at least get their permission. Jay still uses other people's content. He did it just this morning. Just this morning on Instagram, he used a post and repurposed it to make it look like his own. He included a credit, but he does that habitually, and he still doesn't ask for people's permission when doing this. But his plagiarism was taking other people's original words, ideas, work, posts, and making them look like Jay Shetty originals and posting them on his various social feeds.
Yeah, we'll watch just like a couple seconds of this just to give the audience kind of an idea of what we're looking at.
Sure.
So this is the video. So obviously, this quote here.
Dear Jay Shetty.
So it reads, a relationship without trust is like a car without gas. You can stay in it all you want, but it won't go anywhere. Michael J. Herbert. Then we move forward to Jay Shetty. A relationship without trust is like a car without gas. You can stay in it all you want, but it won't go anywhere. I'll link this video in the comments if you guys want to check out the rest of it. But that's kind of the idea of what we're talking about here, just to get you up to speed.
Yeah. So, and I personally find plagiarism to be pretty detestable, as someone who tries to make their life as a creative professional. The idea that someone else would, build their career by taking other people's hard work. I think a lot of people don't realize how much work goes into creating something. Some people are like, well, what's a big deal? It's just a meme. Well, that person took the time to come up with the idea and to execute it. It might just be just a meme that you flick past to you, but they took the time to create it. And obviously it was good enough for Jay to want to repurpose it. Compensate that person or get permission. Some people would be happy to be aggregated onto Jay's feed, but you should ask permission or you should compensate them if that's what they want.
100%. And I mean, it works the same in the content space. I do a lot of like freelance video creation for brands on TikTok mostly. And, is there feedback? Oh, no, it's gone. Okay. Anyways, if I make a video and a brand wants to use it, they're paying me for usage rights to have that content on their profile. It's not just like, oh, well, Danielle posted it on the internet. Now we can use it to, make money. Because ultimately at the end of the day, like, yes, fair use exists and you can take people's content and you can put it in a YouTube video, for example. But if you're using that specifically to then make money, which Jay is definitely doing, like his whole brand is to sell his products and books and whatever.
His brand is himself.
Exactly.
His product is himself.
And his incentive is to use himself to make money. So if I'm using this content for my own personal gain, then it gets a little bit blurry, right?
Well, and some people might say, well, he's not selling anything in that post. But in order for his business to work, he has to get more people interested in who he is. He has to kind of demonstrate that he is this purveyor of wisdom. And that's why he posts so much, is so that he can gain new followers. He can re-engage those followers. He can grow his following. He can grow his platform. And, maybe those people will start listening to his podcast. And that's, the more listeners he have, the more he can charge for advertising on that podcast. Maybe some people will be like, oh, this guy shares cool memes. Maybe I'll check out his life coaching school. So to say it's kind of divorced from his business is, I don't think fair.
Exactly. No, I totally agree. And I think that's why, for me as a creative as well, it's kind of gross to see someone leveraging other people's thoughts and ideas completely as their own with no credit given.
Yeah.
Like, it's very out of integrity.
Pretty rich for a guy who claims to be a spiritual guide.
And that's exactly it. So where does it continue from here? So you attend this conference, you kind of, the curtain gets pulled back, and then what happens from there?
The thing
you're still supposed to be writing for the publicity team at this point, right?
So I wasn't writing for the publicity team. I had previously written a profile of a different social media personality, a different
Gotcha.
influencer. Her name is Tinks, and she's kind of a wisdom peddler. She has a Sirius XM show. Some people think she's controversial. She's just kind of, she's more of a lifestyle influencer, and people call into her show and be like, oh, I don't know what to do about this guy I've been seeing, and I'm not sure if we're serious or he's serious, that kind of stuff. Which, you know what? You don't have to like Tinks. Totally fine. I don't give a shit if you like Tinks. I don't give a shit if you don't like Tinks. But I think that's pretty harmless, relative to, what Jay is doing, charging people thousands of dollars for a life coaching school with questionable credentials. They're just on different levels. So I wrote about a day in the life of her, and I just kind of approached that of like, what's it like to be this influencer whose popularity is skyrocketing? And so I spent a day with her and, went on a photo shoot, and we ate at the Ivy, which is a very kind of celebrity hangout type of restaurant here in LA. And she is represented by the same PR agency as Jay. So I did that for Esquire. A lot of people liked it. It was kind of a fun, I don't know if you read the New Yorker, but it was kind of like a talk in the town style, like,
Gotcha.
yeah, like day in the life type of piece. So then Jay's book comes out, and they're doing publicity for that. And through Esquire, they asked Esquire,
Gotcha.
we liked what John did with our other client. Would John be willing to write an article about Jay for Esquire? So it was through Esquire. I wasn't writing directly for them.
Gotcha.
But they would have preferred that. So I wonder, they must rue the day they ever thought to invite me to Jay's stage.
Whoever made the initial contact has probably been fired.
They have fought really, really hard to get this story killed, and we're successful a couple of times.
Well, because I remember even when you and I initially talked, so for a little bit of context, I guess I should have addressed this at the beginning. Yeah. John and I chatted a few months ago when he was still working on this article just about the life coach school and my thoughts on sort of the coaching industry as a whole. And at that point, I remember you had mentioned that you weren't sure whether or not the article was going to be coming to light because there was so much pushback.
I cannot give enough credit to the Guardian, because they stood tall in the face of, Jay's publicity team kind of attacking my character and attacking my record as a journalist, and Jay's legal team, sending some pretty threatening letters. But I think if you read the article, we were very careful, and this is why your comment got cut, which is something I wanted to address. We were very careful to not talk about anything unless we were really solid about it,
Mm-hmm.
And I think the evidence that we've accumulated speaks for itself, and I would encourage your audience to go and read, and they can just see everything that we have uncovered. Jay makes certain claims. We have evidence to the contrary. We never use the word liar, or that he lied, or fraud. We simply just laid out the evidence that his story laid out evidence that seems to dispute his story. And how he wants to respond is up to him. We still haven't heard back, but they stood strong. Hold on, I'm gonna close my blind because I can tell this is ruining the photo. The image.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think I'm just reading through the comments here. Mallory's saying their push to kill the story is so telling, and I would have to agree with that.
They were pushing to kill the story before they even had known what I reported.
Oh, they hadn't even read anything yet.
No. We hadn't even sent questions to Jay being like, hey, can you clarify X, Y, and Z? Jay had found out because I started to reach out to a lot of people from his past, and it had gotten back. So the way like an investigation like this works is you cast a really, really wide net, because you don't exactly know what you're looking for. And a lot of people aren't going to get back to you. So it's really a numbers game. You got to just contact all of these people and be like, hey, I'm working on this story. Would you be open to talking to me? The vast majority of people are going to say no, but some people are going to say yes. And in order to find the needle, you got to sift through the haystack.
Of course.
So some people are still friends with Jay, still loyal to Jay, and someone, I have no idea who, or maybe multiple people, told Jay that I was working on a story about it. So they were trying to, snuff this out before it had even seen the light of day.
Right.
And again, kind of portraying me as this obsessed fan. They were like, "Oh, it got killed." Esquire didn't want to run an investigation into Jay. Disappointing, but I understand why. And so I shopped it around elsewhere.
So you approached the Guardian with this idea.
I did. My editor at the Guardian had previously written a story about Jay that was one of the only things I had read about Jay that seemed to cast a little bit of a skeptical eye toward him. The amazing thing about this is, like, look, this isn't like the fucking Watergate scandal that I broke here. I just did some very basic fact checking into Jay's backstory, and underneath that scrutiny, it just really hasn't held up. But so many people wrote stories about Jay that were, I mean, so many people were just willing to write all of these glowing profiles about Jay. And, much like Esquire wanted, something kind of positive, fun, and light, and didn't conduct even the simplest fact checking into Jay's background. And once I did, kind of fell apart. So I read that Guardian article and I was like, this guy seems to be, I'm just kind of picking up on the tone of the article. I was like, this guy seems to be a little skeptical of Jay. So I emailed him. His name is Sam Wolfson. I cannot express how grateful I am to him for responding. And right away he responded. He was like, you know what? I always thought there was something slippery about that guy. By this point, I had read both of his books and I identified several discrepancies in Jay's story. The thing that jumped out at me and when I knew there was really a story here is that Jay, in his various media appearances and in his books, he told different versions of the same story. Like, he didn't even keep his lies straight.
Consistent, yeah.
I shouldn't say lies. He didn't even keep his story straight in his multiple retellings of it. And so I constructed this very detailed timeline. Like, he says this happens, in this interview, he says this happens here. In this interview, he says this happens here. I showed it to Sam. I was actually in New York at the time. I'm based in Los Angeles, but at the time I was in New York, and it was like, hey, can I come by the Guardian office and just show you what I have? I was like, my only request is that if you don't take it, I get to keep it and you can't use anything that I show you. Because I put a lot of work into it. And then I was like,
of course.
I was like, look, just let me walk you through what I have, and I could just show you why his story couldn't possibly be true as the way he's told it. Or there's at least some versions of it that he's told that couldn't be true. And I showed it to him and he was like, yeah, I want this. Let's do it. And many, many months later, the thing finally saw publication. So, I mean, even once a Guardian said yes, it took a long time just because it's such a sensitive story. And, Jay's team is so aggressive.
Yeah, I feel like, it's the same with the content here on YouTube. You always have to be careful with like who you talk about, what you say, how you say it. And so I imagine on a scale of something like The Guardian that has the reach that it does, there must be added layers of intricacies. So how long would you say from like start to finish, beginning to do the research to like the final iteration of the article? How long was that period of time?
Probably a year, literally a year.
Wow.
That stage show that I attended was last March.
Gotcha.
And I was reading his book in the run up to that.
And then
it's been a long journey.
What has been the aftermath? So this article came out, when was it? Friday? Last Thursday?
It came out on Thursday, and I remember because it came out 4:30 a.m. Pacific time.
Right.
So I woke up at 5, like a kid on Christmas morning. Like,
yeah.
I couldn't believe that it had finally seen the light of day. I mean, up until it published, I mean, even like right before it published, I was like, man, I feel like, going back with the Guardian's lawyers, for anyone who wants to kind of challenge what was published, I would like for them to know this was edited by, I want to say 5, if not 6 editors at the Guardian, including the editor-in-chief of the Guardian US. It's very rare that the editor-in-chief will read a piece front to back before publication. Editor-in-chief is by and large an administrative role, but for very sensitive pieces, they do come in and weigh in. I mean, they're the final decision. Back and forth with the Guardian's US lawyers, back and forth with the Guardian's UK lawyers, because they're obviously different legal systems with different laws governing, freedom of the press. So it was the most rigorously edited piece I have ever done in my career. So if anyone wants to, call bullshit, I will say that I stand by everything. And yeah.
And what has the feedback been since? Like, are you getting people emailing you being like, you're a dumb idiot? Or is most of it like, okay, let's talk about this more? Like, what do you think the consensus is?
The consensus is overwhelmingly positive.
Good.
Within the journalism community, I've gotten a lot of kudos from, other respected journalists, which has felt great. The mainstream response seems to be, I always knew there was something up with that guy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is interesting. Everyone wants to be like, I always knew it. Like, everyone wants to seem to like take credit for it. There's a lot of that. And then there's a lot of people who have, come out of the woodwork and be like, and are giving me new information. So I have a bunch of new leads that I'm actively chasing down regarding Jay's backstory and regarding his school.
Gotcha. Right. Because I guess now that you've openly spoken about the life coach school specifically,
yeah,
I'm assuming there's going to be students coming forward from that.
That was probably the single biggest break in the investigation. So Jay appears to have just falsely advertised the legitimacy of the life school, claiming it was affiliated with certain universities in the UK, every single one of which said that they have nothing to do with the Jay Shetty certification school and that they want their names taking off of the Jay Shetty marketing materials.
His website. I remember seeing that when we went through it on live stream, the like transferable credits or however he had phrased it. But it's like the whole thing has never made any sense to me because anyone, Jay Shetty, Brooke Castillo, any of these like large life coach certification people, I could start a life coach school tomorrow and tell everyone in my audience, like, you're a certified life coach. It doesn't mean anything. Right. So the fact that he's trying to like improve the legitimacy by associating it with an institution and then to come find out that he doesn't even have that, like the whole thing just seems so suspicious from the get-go.
Right. So that was a huge part of our investigation. So, because people can say like, oh, another self-help guru who lied about his past, like whatever. And I've gotten a lot of feedback like that, that people are just like, oh, hey, well, fair game. That's how marketing works these days, which I don't know why people would have such a low bar for someone who's a spiritual advisor, but hey, you know what? If that's how they feel, that's how they feel. But misstating and misleading people about your for-profit school is something else entirely. I mean, I'm no legal expert, but it would seem like it would put you on pretty shaky ground.
Yeah. I think it'll be interesting to see in the aftermath how whether or not like the life coach school continues going forward, if we see it come in a different sort of iteration or format, or how, I guess it'll depend on how big of a ripple effect like this kind of has on his brand as a whole.
It will be very interesting. What has been interesting so far is that he's still posting about the life coaching school.
I have a burner email on his email list, and I know I got an email this morning being like, enrollment is now open. Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm on his email list as well too, which was it was kind of crazy. I mean, I kind of jolted awake when I checked my email this morning because when you get an email from his life coaching school, it's addressed to your name.
Yeah.
So it was like I got in my email inbox there was Jay Shetty, and the subject line was like, "John, I've got a gift for you" or something. And I was just like, "Oh my god," because we have not heard anything from his camp thus far. I mean, if I was speaking with my editor today because I told him I was like, "Hey, I'm getting some new information," but as far as I know, I personally haven't heard anything. As far as I know, the Guardian hasn't heard anything back, which is peculiar considering how aggressive his team was in the lead up to publication.
Yeah. I saw also, though, I think someone shared this, must have been on Instagram. His like most recent podcast episode though was
Yeah.
something about like how to deal with the haters or how to deal with negative feedback or something like that.
It's how to deal with a narcissist.
Ah.
But he did have a recent one. It was like how to drown out other people's opinions. That
Yeah.
was from, yeah.
Too funny. Just the timing of it, I think.
So yeah, so the affiliation with the universities appears to be false. I mean, if you pull up the article, we got a very strong comment from one of the administrators of the universities, put it in no uncertain terms that he was not happy about their university being associated with the Jay Shetty certification school. And he also claimed that it was approved by a regulatory body in the UK called Ofqual. And that turned out to be false as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And see, this kind of comes back to a point you made earlier, but I think like, okay, if you're just some random guy on the internet with a blog, like, yeah, you might steal something, not condoning this, saying people should do this, but you steal something from someone, chances of you getting caught, not likely because only your mom and your brother read your blog. No big deal.
Right. Yeah.
If you're Jay Shetty and you have, millions of followers and you're making millions or hundreds of millions of dollars a year selling your wisdom online, do you not think that someone, whether it's a reporter or, Joe Schmo off the internet, is going to look like, have you ever been on Reddit? People there are ruthless. They'll find everything they need to know about you. Like, it's so mind blowing to me that someone of that caliber of like notoriety would think that they could get away with just, doing whatever, saying whatever and hoping.
But he did for so long.
Yeah.
Again, I my fellow journalists really failed in their duty to conduct just simple fact checking. And I think, a lot of feedback I got when I was pitching this around after it initially got killed was, well, what's a big deal? So, I got that from so many different editors I talked to. They were like, well, again, who cares? He's doing his podcast. It's not really a big deal. When you are charging thousands of dollars based on questionable information, there is material harm being done. And that takes it into another dimension.
100%. And so I guess that leads me to ask like what your motivation is for writing the piece then. Is it like consumer advocacy? What was kind of the thought behind it?
And I just love a good scoop,
Yeah.
I'm a reporter, I distinctly remember telling my Esquire editor this. I was like, I can't believe you're walking away from this. This story is going to be fucking huge. This guy's so famous, and it's just, it's a timeless. This is like part of a timeless genre of story. Somebody who's a self-help influencer exposed. I'm not afraid to say that there was an element of self-interest here. I'm a reporter, and I want to capture a big scoop. I'm competitive in that respect, and and part of me was just like, I wonder if I can I actually do this? Can I put in all of the work that it takes to, there's always a difference between what you know and what you can prove. And in chasing down a bunch of my leads initially, I found a bunch of people from Jay's religious community who told me, helped guide this investigation. So I knew something was up, but proving it is something different. And that was the real challenge. And part of me wanted to see I was up for it, only took a fucking year of my life.
Yeah. So what's next? Where does this go? Like now you're saying the article's been out for, 5 days now. I'm sure
Yeah.
your inbox is probably flooded. I mean, if I Google Jay Shetty right now, I'm seeing like 13 news articles of like, oh, Jay Shetty sold a fake life, Jay Shetty controversy, all of this stuff. Like obviously you've kind of started this snowball effect of other people talking about it. So
Yeah. So I do want to address one comment from, it's like Rodney Lopez. Jay Shetty was in a cult. Jay Shetty was part and kind of is part of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, more kind of generally known as the Hare Krishna movement. They were really big in the US in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and up until the 90s, but they were mired in controversy, child sexual abuse, corporal, physical abuse of children, and conspiracy to commit murder on 2 occasions. They assassinated 2 guys who ran afoul of one of the gurus. There's an excellent documentary on Peacock. I don't remember the name. I'm sure you can look it up really quickly. But if you just look up Hare Krishna Peacock documentary, there's an excellent documentary about the birth of this religion and how it grew in the US, or the birth of this religious community. I want to be very clear. I met some people from this community who were excellent, decent people. But as an organization, it has a very troubled past. Some people have said it's a cult in the past. That's actually even been contested in court. There we have it. Guru's Karma Murder. When the Krishnas were really gaining popularity within the US, some people would leave their families and go join these communes that they started all throughout the US. And it was even brought to court where a family tried to sue ISKCON and accuse them of brainwashing, of being a cult. And if I remember correctly, it went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court was like, look, we have freedom of religion in this country. This is a genuine religion. People are free to practice however they want. The religious tradition goes back thousands of years. It's based on some of the oldest religious texts in existence. So it's no more a cult than Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism. Some people would say all religion are cults. I mean, sure, whatever, if that's your take. But it is a legitimate religion with good people in it. As an organization, though, it does have a little bit of a troubled past.
gotcha.
But what's crazy is that I was learning about this religion. One of the people they killed is like a mile from my house in Los Angeles.
Really?
Yeah. Now that was like wild. I drive past it all the time. That temple that they have there.
Wow. Yeah, it's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as to where this goes next, there'll probably be a follow-up piece, depending on how soon I can chase down these leads. After that, who knows? So.
Yeah, I guess big moves for you in terms of like, I think opening the opportunity to investigate, maybe not by you personally, maybe other people in the industry, but I think it pulls back the curtain a little bit to what's actually happening in the self-help space as a whole.
Yeah.
And for like someone who snarks on that kind of content, it's like interesting to see where this progresses as time goes on.
For sure. And one response is like, well, why don't you take down this guy or take down this person? Why don't you write about the industry as a whole? Again, you can't do it. That's impossible. And so like to get your arms around the entire industry, to do an investigation to one person and to focus very tightly on them and how their business within this industry works. And then that becomes kind of illustrative of what other people are doing too. That's kind of how this is done. Because I don't know, it's interesting. A lot of the responses like, hey, I know you should do your next article on, and just somebody that a person has like a personal, like a personal problem with. And it's like, well, that's not entirely how it works, though. I appreciate people who have reached out. The outpouring of support has been, it's been very nice.
For sure. Yeah. I get that a lot too of people being like, investigate this person or I
Yeah.
had this and I'm just like, I can't do it all, but I'll give you, general red
Totally.
flags to look out for.
Right. And it's like, well, you just don't like that person. Like
Mhm.
that's like,
And I think like a lot can be said about, I know again in the coaching space specifically, what, Jessica over here is doing, Bethany is also doing. So we don't have to talk about Jessica or Bethany because they're both doing the same thing. If we can just talk about, the actions, the behaviors, we can still kind of achieve the same result because we know what to look out for. And I think in the case of Jay Shetty, while this particular article is about Jay in particular, even just kind of bringing awareness to the types of, things they say, the qualifications they claim to have, that kind of thing will
how their
open people's
business is
eyes to other
structured.
people. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, how their business is structured. I think that's, very, just something to be aware of. In the piece I write that the Jay Shetty Certification School isn't a true MLM because you're not required to recruit new people in order to be a successful coach, right? I mean, you could just go get your training, get your certification, and then go start your life coaching school and, be successful. I'm sure there's some people who have been wildly successful as Jay Shetty coaches. Everyone I talked to for the article, not a single one of them has a thriving life coaching school, which I found it. But, it was interesting. All of those people, to a person, they all said it was a great experience. I would do it again. It was worth every penny, even though none of them are earning a full-time income as a life coach.
Get the thing they were sold on. And I think that's an interesting piece to really think about too, from a psychology perspective, is like, and I see this a lot with business coaches. It's like, okay, I paid this business coach, whatever, $5,000 and I didn't get the results they promised, but it's fine. I'll just, you know what? I have a better mindset, so it was worth it. And it's like they gaslight themselves into like, convince themselves that they had a positive experience when maybe they just don't want to face the fact that like, oh, I did get duped. Like I know for me, it took me like 5 years to realize like someone took advantage of me. I was just like, no, it's fine. Everything's fine. Because I didn't want to admit the fact that like maybe I didn't see the red flags and I shouldn't have given this woman my money. Like I think there's an element of pride that goes into it too, where they maybe don't want to admit that perhaps they weren't given what they were sold on. And I mean, that's speculative, totally, but something to think about.
I think that's totally fair. I mean, do a little Jay Shetty right now. The sunk cost fallacy. It's a very common psychological concept. To your point, people don't want to feel like they got conned, like they wasted their money.
Exactly, 100%. Is there anything else you want to share in regards to the article or like messages you were hoping to get across? I know you have your Twitter and your Instagram linked there. I can also link it in the chat too.
I would love if you read the piece, but I understand not everyone, with attention spans being what they are, not everyone's going to read a 6,000 word exhaustive investigation. But if you go to my Instagram, I have a highlighted story where I've kind of broken down the Jay Shetty investigation into kind of more digestible bits. You can also follow me on Twitter if you're on Twitter. But, if I have any message, I would say just support journalism. Journalism is in a very tough spot right now. I know a lot of people have been laid off from various publications. It's really hard, All the advertising revenue in the world pretty much goes to one of three companies, Google, Facebook, or Amazon. Ad-supported journalism is really tough. So subscribe to a newspaper. Hey, you can go to The Guardian right now, and if you are happy with this piece, you can gift them some money, and that will allow them to hire more people like me to write more stories like this in the future. So, if you feel so compelled, contribute to The Guardian. That would make me very happy.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time, John. This was an interesting discussion, and it's great to hear the insider. So it's not just me, reading the article to the class. It's nice to hear from the man who wrote it. So I do appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. And thank you for your help with the investigation. We didn't talk about that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just a talking head on the internet. So always here to share what I think is right or wrong. Well, whether or not it's true, that's up for the audience to decide.
You know, for the audience, I got some good quotes from Danielle that, again, in our attempt to really just kind of stick to the facts of the case, did not make it into the final cut of the draft, but we did embed your video about Jay.
Yeah, I do appreciate
And,
that. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm
gotten-
curious, has it, ticked up a little bit?
Yeah, so I can see like in the analytics even, and it's like hockey stick now, like the day it was published. And then the comments too. We've been having a pretty good discussion with people leaving their feedback and their thoughts too. So just another place for people who are always a little bit skeptical, I think, to feel as though they're being reassured in their beliefs.
Yeah. Well, just kind of hearing you talk about how this space works, because again, it's not something I was familiar with, was very helpful. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. Okay, I'm just going to play the outro. Thank you so much, everyone. Live chat, you're the realist as always. I appreciate the commentary. And thanks again, John, so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.